Welcome, everyone, to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research virtually. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Public Programs Director of YIVO. We're thrilled to have you here today for Professor Dina Porat's lecture, Instilling Yiddishkayt into Zionism. This lecture is a part of our Yiddish Civilization Lecture Series, which is a part of our Uriel Weinreich Summer Program of Yiddish Language Instruction. And we're so pleased to be able to share this series of lectures with the broader public, as well as with our students who are here learning Yiddish with us for the summer. I'd like to hand it over to David Brown, the academic director of the program, to introduce Professor Porat.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. And this is the fifth year of our series of Yiddish civilization lectures, primarily for our 80 students who are enrolled in the Uriel Weinreich summer program, intensive summer program for Yiddish language, literature, and culture. And we like to have this lecture series populated by the best and most interesting and most relevant out there for our students and for the broader public of people who are watching through YIVO's website. I'm David Brown, the academic director of the summer program, and it's my pleasure to have invited Professor Dina Porat, who is a wonderful expert on various things, and a number of her interests come together in today's talk. About Dina, she is the founding head of the Cantor Center for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry and served as head of the Department of Jewish History of the Rosenberg School for Jewish Studies and as incumbent of the Alfred P. Slaner Chair in Anti-Semitism and Racism, all at Tel Aviv University. She served as the chief historian at Yad Vashem from the years 2010 to 2021 and is now its academic director. Dina is the expert on the life of Abba Kovner, of Vilna fame, and also very important in the history of the partisans of Vilna and in YIVO's own story. And it is my pleasure to have Dina begin her talk, which is entitled Instilling Yiddishkayt into Zionism. Dina, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you all for having invited me. Thank you, David. Thank you, the other organizers. Indeed, the topic we chose is Instilling Yiddishkayt into Zionism by Abba Kovner, the person whom David described, a poet, a partisan, the person who wrote the manifesto, the first manifesto at the end of 1941, calling for resistance, calling not to go like sheep to slaughter, Yidden, Lomer nicht gehen wie Schafe verschrite. That was the title of the manifesto, first written in Yiddish, then translated into Hebrew, and read in front of a gathering of what remained in the ghetto of Kovno after the first waves of killings, calling upon them and all the community together to resist, to understand that there is no room for illusions. Had he written only that, that would be enough for a lifetime. But he went on being a commander of, founder and commander of the underground, and then a commander of partisans in the forest, then heading the bricha, the coming down from Vilna southwards after realizing the Jewish life will not be permitted by the Soviets. He headed a flow of survivors down to Lublin, then to Bucharest, then they headed on to Italy, where he handed thousands already into the hands of the Jewish brigade, the soldiers from the land of Israel, and then they went on ships. Well, then when they were available on ships to the land of Israel, then he thought about and organized, thought about revenge, and organized a group of 50 youngsters, ex-partisans, ex-ghetto fighters, to carry out a revenge plan which did not succeed. Luckily, they wanted to kill 6 million Germans. And then he was arrested, came back, released, came to the land of Israel, fought during the 1948 War of Independence, was a very central, he was always a central person in all these junctions. And then he was for 40 years member of his Kibbutz Ein HaHoresh, where he was very instrumental in the life of a kibbutz, as we will see in a minute, but also in the life of the country as a poet, a very known poet, author, moral figure, a builder and designer of the Diaspora Museum and other museums, very active every day until the end of his life. So this is, in short, in very short, the life of Abba Kovner. And now to our topic. What he did when he was a member of Ein HaHoresh was to try to combine Judaism and Zionism, socialist, atheist, Zionist. His kibbutz, he was a member of HaShomer HaTza'ir. He naturally joined with a group, a kibbutz of HaShomer HaTza'ir, whose members were staunch, secular, atheists, socialists, and their aim was to distance themselves from Judaism, from the old world. This song, the hymn, was that the old world should be completely ruined to the ground. Olam yashan adei hayisod nachriva. An old world should be ruined to the ground. And he didn't like it. He didn't like it. He was himself atheist, secular, yes, but he was imbued with the knowledge of Jewish sources, which he studied himself in the famous Strashun library in Vilna, hours upon hours reading, studying, remembering. And he not only did not like it, he saw a danger, a real danger in life that supposedly it's a new form of life in a new country, and it's a new Jew, it's an Israeli, Yofi, but it is devoid of Judaism, and he distances himself from the treasures of Judaism. And he thought that that when Zionism, the new Zionism, is starting to form new ceremonies, new holidays, or the holidays are the same, Pesach and Purim, etc., but new ways to celebrate them without having the treasures of Judaism as part of them, they will be the new ceremonies, the new texts will be poor, will be dry, it will take time. It will take so much time, it takes so much time for a text to be canonized, a text to become a real text that everyone knows, that you tell to your children. This takes time, sometimes generations. And so what he tried to do was to have Judaism offer itself into this new life. Okay, this is the framework of what we are going to speak about in detail. And I'd like first to emphasize a number of principles around which he worked and around which his thought, or he organized his thought. Okay, first of all, one is that Judaism, as he defined it, Judaism is the culture of a public. The culture of a public. It is not a religion. It is not necessarily believing in God. It is a culture, and not of an individual, but of a public, which means that that he saw Judaism as something that works together. People who work together in groups, in communities, in chavruta, which sits and studies together. It is always a togetherness and not life of an individual. He saw towards the end of his life, he died towards the end of the 80s, sorry, in 1987, he already could see that another culture is coming in instead of the togetherness of the socialism, of the kibbutz, of building a new country. Individualism, fulfilling one's own dreams and needs, is coming in. But he was against it. And he saw only the first signs of it. And what he wanted was to have people understand that the greatness of Judaism and its strength is in its being a culture of a public, of working together, of understanding that individual strength comes from belonging to a public. Another principle was that he realized that consent, general agreement among Jews is not possible. As you know, as we know, it is a weakness and a strength. It is, I think, the charm of the Jewish people, of having so many opinions that compete, debate, but still it is one entity. And he said, controversy, machloket, controversy is a cornerstone in the culture of Israel, which means the Jewish people. Machloket, even pina betarbut Israel. It is a cornerstone that he knew. Many are not going to agree with him. Many would oppose what he's doing. But still, he would go on with it. He would try to convince. He would understand that he knew ahead that debates and controversies will always be there. Okay, but still it is a cornerstone in the culture of the Jewish people. One more principle was that a principle that guided him in what he was doing was that he strongly opposed the new Israeli notion that when you come to the land of Israel, you immigrate, okay? You change your name, you Hebrewize it. Later, in the after the state was born, you could not even go abroad on a mission without having a Hebrew name in your passport. And Ben Gurion was very adamant. I was born Dina Feige Kostrinsky, okay? The Dina Feige turned into a Dina, and the Kostrinsky into Kitron. And I married a 40, a navigator in the Air Force, who turned into Porat. So you changed the name. You sort of changed identity. You were reborn. And there was a famous book by Moshe Shamir, a very central author, called Bemo Yadav, in his own hands. And it started with the first words of this book, which was a must reading, everyone read it. Elik nolad min hayam. Elik was born out of the sea. And Kovner said, Kinderlach, this is nonsense. No one is born out of the sea. He was born to his father, who was born to his grandfather, who was born to his great-grandfather, and so not on. So backward, we are a chain. of generations. And it is not correct, and it is ahistoric, not only Jewish, but ahistoric to think that new generations are born from nowhere and they start new roots and they cut the former roots. He was very much against this, totally, not very much, totally against this cutting of roots. And he kept telling the story of the Maggid from Mezerich, who was standing as a child by his mother, watching their house, the wooden house in a shtetl, going on in fire, being burned together. And the book, the Bible, in which on the first pages was the tradition, the family, the newborn, everything was written there, and the book was burnt with the chain of generations, genealogy of the family. And the Maggid of Mezerich, then a small child, told his mother, "Mama, don't cry. I will write you a new book." And when the rabbi was a grown-up person, he was ashamed of schwitzing to his mother that he would write her a new book. There is no new book. We are all one chain, and we come from former generations, and no Elik was born out of the sea. Okay, I think these are the first three principles. Perhaps there are one or two that it skipped me. Kovner's writing is really rich. And I think we can go now to what he did actually with this. What did he try to do actually in practice? So please think about the kibbutz. In the 1950s, at the beginnings of the state, as we said, socialist, atheist, secular, work is a religion. To work, to cultivate the land, to rebuild the place, rebuild the land, have it ready for many newcomers to come. This was a sort of religion. You had to work. And Shabbat was no Shabbat. You could get a Shabbat in the middle of the week, or one day off in the middle of the week, and work on Shabbat. And certainly agricultural works were done on Shabbat. And there was no Kabbalat Shabbat, no Friday evening where people sit with candles and do a Kiddush. There was no Kiddush and no Kabbalat Shabbat. And Kovner couldn't, he just saw the lack of such basic traditions. He saw it as some kind of void, emptiness, which he tried to fill. And so he started with having the kibbutz members gather on Shabbat. They were gathering with white shirts, absolutely eating dinner together, but no kiddush, no challah. And he introduced the challah and the kiddush and the candles. First, they opposed. They said, what is that? We are distancing ourselves from diaspora, from the Judaism that sprang up in the diaspora. We want it different. We will read, let's say, poetry, which they did. But Abba Kovner said, okay, poetry and kiddush can go together, one after the other. And slowly but surely, he introduced Shabbat. He even wrote a book, a whole book, called Chof, which means Chochma uPiyut, and wisdom and piyut, poetry, and in which he offered the members of the kibbutz a variety of poems, paragraphs from authors, from sources, from Jewish sources, Hasidic tales, legends, beautiful chapters from the Bible, etc., and put it all together, gave it to them, which means every member could have a copy, and it caught up. This combination caught up slowly but surely. Then Gewalt Kaddish. There was no Kaddish. There was no saying Kaddish after the dead. There was no sitting of Shiva. Shiva was one day, and then you got back to work. What they did was to bury and to stand silently around the grave. And there was no Kaddish, saying nothing, silent. One day, Kovner couldn't hold it anymore, and he couldn't hold it anymore. It was some difficult death, not a passing away. He was killed, a very central person in the kibbutz, and Kovner couldn't stand this silence anymore. And suddenly, to the anger and amazement of the member of the kibbutz, he began saying Kaddish. And they didn't dare stop him. It's a Kaddish, nevertheless, yeah? So he did it once, and then twice, and it caught up in a way because it was really too much not to say anything and to have Shiva for one day. So later they did not have 7 days. Let's not exaggerate. You can't stop working 7 days, but you can let half a day or in the evening. So Kaddish was Shabbat, Kaddish. You know that Meir Yaari was the famous leader of the HaShomer HaTza'ir movement, of the Mapam party, a very admired leader. And one day when he was already quite old, he said, well, I would like Kovner, if you agree, when I'm dead, when I pass away, to eulogize me, to speak after I'm buried. And Kovner said, and they were rivals, and they did not agree on anything. And Kovner said, yes, with pleasure, but it will cost you a Kaddish, which Meir Yaari never heard and never wanted to be heard. Okay, then came chuppah. This is a beautiful thing, really. No rabbi came to marry, and in the first years of the kibbutz, they never bothered to marry. Kovner and his partner for life, his dear Vitka, never married. And others as well, you didn't marry. Kovner didn't like that as well. And he did a wonderful thing. He took a long poem by Chernichovsky, the famous poet, Elka's Wedding, and turned it into a show in which the members of the kibbutz danced the sherele, and waved handkerchiefs, and sang. It was beautiful, beautiful. And the members of the kibbutz loved it. They just loved it much better than just saying a few words or not having a wedding at all. So wedding became a very central ceremony in the kibbutz life, with this show, with dancing and singing. Not only that, he put up a book about which I'll speak in a minute. And in this book, each couple had a page and a photo and the story of his life, beautifully written for posterity. So he put a chuppah in with a biblical taste, with palm tree leaves, huge ones. It kept on going years after he passed away because they liked it so much. And he was the Rebbe who married the couples. He was the Rebbe, and he conducted the ceremony, and he ended each ceremony by saying that indeed revenge did not succeed. No revenge was taken on the Germans, and I would say, if I may, would say in parentheses that this is very much to the credit and the greatness of the Jewish people. No revenge was taken, but a new family, that's the sweetest revenge. And today's survivors, I befriended many of them with the years. I have one who is now 104 years old. And when he had his birthday, he said, Hitler, I won and you lost. You're dead, I'm alive. You had no children. I have children, grandchildren, 20 great-grandchildren, etc. So that was, wedding became a revenge and a very central theme in the kibbutz. Then the Seder night. Oh, they ate bread on Pesach, and they did not fast on Yom Kippur. Again, Kovner, he again slowly fighting against the controversies and those who objected him. He organized a Seder night but not with the traditional Haggadah. Traditional Haggadah was not read in any of the kibbutzim, not only Ein HaHoresh, his kibbutz, or the most leftist one, never, ever. There was a new Haggadah, a kibbutz Haggadah written in the land of Israel and then read in the state. There were a few versions, but anyhow, it was a new kibbutz Haggadah. And Kovner, he wanted to have a new, but this he had to swallow, to read this new Haggadah and to have the whole ceremony, which of course, again, he conducted until sons of Ein HaHoresh took it over and conducted it with biyad ramah, with a high hand. I will go on with the examples, but I want to make a stop in the middle to ask, how come the kibbutz member agreed? Their principle was that the old world, which included all these habit ceremonies, etc., that were so central in the diaspora, and the diaspora was a disaster. Why, if this is what was the worldview, which was so strong and guided the life to such an extremity, why did they agree? Perhaps because Kovner was doing it cleverly, slowly, not pushing it. If he saw opposition, he waited and then tried again and again. He did it gradually, and until he saw that it really becomes a part of life. But I think this was not the main reason. It is not written anywhere, but I believe that they saw during the Holocaust how the families, the communities, the branches of the youth movements, all that they left behind, all this was destroyed. So there was a physical destruction to which they were not part. They, of course not. They just saw the results and lamented. The results were painful, no doubt. But they all came from these families, which originally, many of them were, if not religious or Orthodox, were at least keeping tradition. And they felt that what they were doing since the 20s, when the country began being settled, and the first kibbutzim started developing their specific way of life. And until after the Holocaust, this was a mental destruction. There was a physical destruction done by the Germans and all their collaborators and accomplices, but there was a mental destruction because what characterized Jewish life, especially in Eastern Europe, but not only, Northern Africa as well, if you don't keep it, you don't continue it, it's destroyed. It will vanish. And then came Kovner. And Kovner stood in front of them as if reminding them daily of this sin, of mentally destroying, of trying to forget, of trying to put away, to take off the stage of history, all these habits, ceremonies, holidays that characterized the Jewish shtetl in so many places. He, as if, was reminding them that this is wrong, that there is something wrong here, and they agreed. I think that this is why they slowly but surely agreed. And the third reason is that they began seeing, or realizing that in fact it did not harm or hurt the sacred kibbutz principles: work, togetherness, helping each other, working together. They could go on with all these principles, but still instill into it these texts and ceremonies and habits that were 1,000 years long. Nothing happened, the sky didn't fall. In the leaders of the movement of the HaShomer HaTza'ir and Mapam said, well, Kovner is putting a kippah, a yarmulke, on the head of the movement. And this is terrible, of course. No one walks with a kippah anymore. But with time, they agreed, because in their heart they understood that this is a correct direction, that this is a way to commemorate their parents, communities, etc. Kovner wanted very much not only to bring in the habit, ceremonies, etc., that characterized Jewish life. He wanted also the HaShomer HaTza'ir in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Poland, in the Baltic countries, the Ukraine, Belarus, etc. He wanted them too not to be forgotten. Not only to be forgotten because they held rebellions, they took arms, they defended, tried to rise against the Germans. Defend is not a good word, because against the German might, you couldn't defend yourself, you couldn't rescue, but you could at least show resistance. And this was very much to the credit of his movement, of other movements. Okay, this yes, but life of youth movements, the life was much, much richer than what we remember now. When we think about them, we think about them in the Holocaust. But before the Holocaust, they led rich lives in which they mentioned and celebrated all kinds of dates. They added the death of Herzl, Kaf Tammuz. It's in August. It will be now at the end of July. We are going to mention and commemorating 120 years to the death of Herzl. Bialik, same date more or less. Lag BaOmer, they put an emphasis on ceremonies and holidays that were not necessarily too orthodox or too religious. But they did it. They had Kabbalat Shabbat. Welcoming Shabbat every Friday was a big thing in the youth movement. Singing, reading what they wrote, and he wanted this too, not to be forgotten and not to be cast away. Okay, I'm closing this middle and I'm going on with a few more examples. One is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, at the beginning, they didn't fast. And they were working. Okay, Yom Kippur, so what? But again, slowly but surely, they stopped fasting. They started fasting, stopped working for a day. That was considered a sin, not to work on a full day. And took another day. Took instead of another day, a sort of Shabbat. And especially after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, which changed a lot also in the kibbutz movement. It changed a lot in the way that youngsters, the generation that fought in this war, were gathering together, trying to think about what happened, trying to write, produce collective writing. And Yom Kippur became a day that all the country, not only the kibbutzim, all the country was keeping. Not just religiously, not necessarily by going to synagogues, though Yom Kippur is the Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. These are the only days that most of the country, or most of the Jewish population of the country goes to a synagogue. So there, it was easier for him to bring the habits, the fasting, the reading together, the thinking together, sitting together. Yeah. Then, Holocaust Memorial Day. Holocaust Memorial Day, sorry, a minute. Yeah. Holocaust Memorial Day became by law, the law of the Knesset that started Holocaust Memorial Day was enacted in 1959, which means some 11 years after the state was born. But before that, before the formal law, there were commemorations of Holocaust Memorial Day. Everyone chose what he liked. Some chose the day that some rebellions or days when their shtetl was ruined, or those who came from the Soviet Union, the end of the war, May 8th, etc., etc. The religious ones, Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, the day for those whose burial place is not known, etc. So habits became formulating around Holocaust Memorial Day. And since 1959, the question was how to really fill this day, this law, with contents. What do you do on this day? Okay, and Kovner came up with the idea. It was first in his kibbutz mentioned on the Seder night, because the revolt in Warsaw, in the Warsaw ghetto, began on the Seder night. You remember, it was April 19, Seder night that year, 1943. Hitler was born on April 20th, and the Germans wanted to give him the destruction of the largest ghetto as a gift. It didn't work. They held on for 6 weeks. But And so it was mentioned on Seder night. But Seder night is one thing, Holocaust Memorial Day is another thing. And Kovner had it separated and came up with new ideas, that the firstborn in each family would go out, bring 6 flowers and put them on the family table and read, have readings, special readings for the day. And he wrote a nizkor, not a yizkor, a nizkor. Yizkor means he will, or the people will remember. Nizkor went together hand in hand with his notion that Judaism is the culture of a public. Nizkor, we. So Holocaust Memorial Day was also shaped by him. And then he did, I went to see it in Ein HaHoresh. It's something wonderful. In each, the whole thing is remarkable. In each, we know that in each Jewish community there was a book, the Pinkas HaKehila, the community Pinkas. And he wanted Ein HaHoresh as a Jewish community to have a Pinkas. And he physically helped create a large book with thick pages. The cover was embroidered with silk, with silver silk. It is beautiful. And it tells page by page the history of Ein HaHoresh as a community. As we said, each couple that married had 2 pages there for the bridegroom and the kala, Chatan and kala. And the whole thing was as if that was indeed a Jewish community having a Pinkas. Okay. I see that I'm running as always out of time, and I will end with a good example, one more good example. When Ein HaHoresh, when the kibbutz turned 50 years old, it was, Kovner designed the huge celebration, all kinds of ideas, studying, cleaning up the kibbutz, building this, that, I will not go into all of this. And he put up a show. Again, he was always, the man was active 24 hours a day. He put up a big show. He turned the dining room, the kibbutz dining room, he turned it into a ship. And the ship was coming from the ocean, that was a staging, coming ashore. And on board ship, there were 11 people. And it was called, the whole thing was the 11th commandment. There are 10, and they added one more. And the 11th one was the coming from all diasporas to the land of Israel and building it together. Each of these 11 was really a member of the kibbutz who came from another country. They came mainly from Poland and Lithuania, but from many other countries as well. So there were 11 coming on the ship, and they were coming, landing, joining, and working together. This went hand in hand with his notion that there is no Elik born out of the sea, that they are coming by sea, but they are bringing their habits, their culture, the Judaism, the Jewish traditions, each of them, and all these are being merged together and making Zionism richer by that, and not just this dry, not saying Kaddish, not fasting, eating bread on Pesach, etc., etc. He merged as much as he could, as much as they allowed him, Other kibbutzim opposed, Gewalt, what is he doing? He merged as much as he could Judaism instilled it into Zionism, thereby enriching Zionism, which on its part gave new life to former Judaism. Okay, so this is about instilling Judaism into Zionism, and especially into the life of the kibbutz, and later it became much more accepted. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. We've got some great questions from the audience, and I have some questions of my own. And if you're out there and you have a question, now is the time to put it into the Q&A function. Before we get into some of the questions here, I just want to know, Professor Porat, what brought you to Abba Kovner and got you interested in him?
Well, to put it shortly, first I studied with my late professor about Jews in Lithuania, because that was the first place where the Germans invaded and where the killing started and where local population killed. And so it was like the beginning of the mass murder. And I wanted, and he wanted me to study this. And there the figure of Abba Kovner popped up, of course. And then my PhD was on what did the Yishuv try to do? What did the Yishuv try to do in order to rescue the Jews of Europe, which couldn't, was a small, poor Yishuv. But again, this figure came up in several. So I said, okay, he combines the two, the there and the here, the then and the now. And so, but I have to tell you a secret, if you promise not to tell it to anyone. And this is that I wrote his biography for 5 long years. His widow, Vitka, helped me a lot, a remarkable lady. And I gathered material and I interviewed 110 people. But I got up every morning and said, Dina, listen, Dinale, it's a lot of chutzpah to write about a figure such as Abba Kovner. Who am I to write about him? But okay, I tried my best.
Wonderful. There's a question about Vitka. Maybe we'll come back to her in a little bit. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, you talked about the then and the now.
Yes.
Maybe you could speak a little bit more about then. You talked a lot about Abba Kovner's, activities after the war. But could you speak a little bit about his political and religious commitments before the war?
Okay. Religious commitment he did not have. He, as we said, he studied a lot as an autodidact, studied Jewish sources. And he was so knowledgeable about them, became so knowledgeable that when he designed the Diaspora Museum, now they have a new exhibition, totally different, but the first exhibition, permanent exhibition of the Diaspora, he put up a wall, a huge wall called the Sea of Halacha, in which he mentioned all rabbis and all developments from the Bible, the Mishnah, the Talmud, etc., along the times with the names and the places. It's a huge chart of the development of Judaism. So there was no religious commitment, but there was a lot of knowledge to be shared and to be not forgotten. Political, yes. Political, he did not want to, he was offered the place in the Knesset, etc. He did not want to. He wanted to be a misnaged. He was a Litvak. He wanted to be a misnaged who always speaks up his mind, and his mind should always be different than the mainstream. So he was a kind of a moral figure that spoke out against all kinds of evils and of wrongs, etc. in the country and in his roots and his own movement. And I'll give you an example. He was never one who went in the way that others paved for him or paid for. He was always thinking for himself. 1956, Soviet Russia invades Hungary and crushes Hungary. And there is an urgent meeting of the HaShomer HaTza'ir and Mapam in Israel. And Meir Yaari, the leader, justifies what the Soviet Union is doing, which Kovner couldn't tolerate. He was sitting, as always, at the back row, at the last row, ran up to the stage, jumped on it and said, Meir, how can you? They are our brothers. We cannot accept it. He was, his political convictions were based on morals and on principles, not on going in favor. He hated the Soviet Union. He hated the Soviet Union upside down. He saw them in the forests. He saw how cruel the soldiers were, how they could cut a finger for a ring and an arm for a watch, and how they raped and how they threw off a driving train. He saw the outcome of good ideas. He saw the practical outcome with a lot of rage. And when the partisan came to the land of Israel and spoke against the Soviet Union, they were supposed to be nicht soll. How can you speak against the sacred Soviet Union and against Stalin? But he did, and they all did, the partisans. Yeah.
So one viewer is asking about the role that Abba's wife Vitka played in his activities at the kibbutz. Maybe you could speak a bit about Vitka?
Yeah. Well, Vitka, I liked her a lot. A great lady. Very modest. She, during the Holocaust, was, I always say that when God made this combination called Vitka, he forgot to instill fear into it. She was fearless. She was a commander of a unit of men who, Gashashim, pathfinding in the forest. And she took off. She was the first, not only woman, also among men, the first person to take off a German train off its tracks. In the middle of 1942, she went out of the ghetto with an explosive, a mine that Abba Kovner made up, put it, and the train was off its track. She got a medal, the hero of the Soviet Union, which is the highest, but never bothered to go and take it. And when she got it, it was already in the 80s or the 90s. He said, Vitka, please hang it on the wall. It's but when they were members of the kibbutz, Vitka helped him quietly. The stage was his. The stage was his. She didn't push herself. She maybe advised him, but she never pushed herself forward. And she was very much respected for that. Yeah. She was, by profession, a clinical psychologist, taking care of children, and was very much wanted.
Very interesting. One of our viewers is asking about the religious kibbutzim, the religious kibbutz movement, because a lot of the innovations that you discussed have to do with religious ritual, even if they're not meant in a religious sense. Do we know what Kovner thought of this movement?
Well, I didn't find a lot about it. This was very far from his leftist kibbutz and his leftist movement, but he definitely agreed very much. For instance, I know that he visited Yavne, a religious major kibbutz, and liked a lot what he saw there. Absolutely. And they were, and they really combined, as he wanted, Zionism and building the country with life of religion. No contrast. There was no contrast. Yep.
We've got a few questions here about the way that Kovner felt about the Yiddish language. Did he see Yiddish as playing a role in this? Was there any Yiddish instruction in his kibbutz or in other kibbutzim?
No. Studying Yiddish was an idea that was not even raised. No one studied Yiddish. But his Yiddish was ausgezeichnet. He knew excellent Yiddish. He wrote first in Yiddish. He liked it. He liked the language a lot. Again, he didn't see any contradiction between Yiddish and Hebrew. Neither do I. I was born in Buenos Aires. My first language was Yiddish. And I see no contradiction between the there and the here and the Yiddish and the Hebrew. Of course not. But he realized that no one is going to speak Yiddish. It was the 50s. Now, in recent decades, I don't have to tell you, Yiddish faces a revival. We have courses in Tel Aviv University. I hope they are not competing with yours, but we have also a good summer school of Yiddish and a whole department of Yiddish literature, etc. Then it was unthinkable. Yiddish was almost formally forbidden. When Jigen and Schumacher wanted to put up Yiddish theater, people flocked. They liked it. They mameloschen. But formally, they were persecuted. Yiddish during the first years, in which there was a strong struggle to have Hebrew really be the language of everyday life, Yiddish was out of question. It was actually banned. And it took a long time when Zionism threw off its horns. It's not horns, kotzim. It's
thorns.
Sharp. It's sharp.
Thorns.
Thorns, not horns. Thorns, that's it. Took off its thorns. And when today people are not that terribly anxious to have the Kostrinsky into Gitron. With Kostrinsky, you can also be a good Zionist. So it softened. And when it softened, Yiddish could come back. Yeah.
On the topic of Yiddish, is there anything you can tell us about Kovner's relationship with Avram Sutzkever? You talked about the golden chain, the golden Yiddishkayt, as being a really important idea for Kovner, and it reminded me of Sutzkever's famous, a periodical in Israel, the golden Yiddishkayt.
Yeah, which was read. And you know what? Before I come to the relations, there is a very good book right under my nose here. Israel in Yiddish Israeli literature, 4867. Although it was banned, and although it was formally not there was a rich Yiddish culture, especially in Tel Aviv. Less in Jerusalem, but in Jerusalem with the Orthodox neighborhood, which speak until today, they speak Yiddish. Yeah? But in Tel Aviv, there were newspapers, there were clubs, literary clubs, there were gatherings. There was a lot of activity in Yiddish, despite the fact that it was formally not there. And Sutzkever was certainly part of it. And his golden Yiddishkayt was read all over, and he published it for years because there was readership. Kovner and Sutzkever were bosom friends. They were, I never met Kovner. I didn't know him. I started writing way after he passed away. And on the one hand, that's a disadvantage. On the other, it is an advantage, because he was such a dominating figure that I don't know how could I have written with him around. So I interviewed Sutzkever, who lived many years after him, lived in the north of Tel Aviv, and he was coming to the Diaspora Museum very often when Kovner was designing it. And they were speaking. And one of the team in the Diaspora Museum told me that when Sutzkever came and they were both speaking Yiddish, it was elevating. People stopped reading. It was such Yiddish and poetry. They were bosom friends. Kovner was very instrumental in having Sutzkever taken by a plane from the forest to Moscow. He and his wife were the only ones taken. All the rest stayed in the forest until the end in dire conditions, because he realized his greatness for Yiddish poetry. Today, by the way, his granddaughter Hadass Calderon, is putting on theater pieces in memory and in continuation of her grandfather Sutzkever. So they were great friends and great admirers together of Yiddish and of poetry. Yeah.
I see we're reaching the end of our time, so just want to combine a few questions or one final question, which is, where can people learn more about Kovner? Are there English language sources that you would recommend for those that don't know Hebrew? Documentaries?
Well, this is not so ethical, but I'd love to recommend the biography I wrote about him, which was published by Stanford in, what was it? 2010. It got the Jewish National Book Award, published, as we said, by Stanford, very well translated. And I'm afraid to say that this is the only biography written about him. English sources are not in existence. He was very little of his poetry was translated into English, because his Yiddish was ausgezeichnet, and in Hebrew was a new creation. He didn't write in Hebrew, he wrote in Kovnerish. It's another language. It's very hard to understand. And the few translations, it just didn't work. And everything he did was Hebrew and Yiddish. There are no English sources. So what I can recommend is the book, and another book I wrote called Nakam, on the revenge story, also by Stanford, published like 2 years ago.
Wonderful. So
but sources in English hardly exist.
So Nakam, and the name of the biography in English is The Fall of a Sparrow.
Yeah, it's The Fall of a Sparrow. I took it from Hamlet. The Fall of a Sparrow. The fall. Yeah, it's called The Fall of a Sparrow, The Life and Times of Abba Kovner.
Professor Porat, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you.
And for all those out there with us, thank you so much for joining. We are back tonight, actually, with another talk about a translation of a Celia Dropkin novel with Anita Norwich. And we're back with our next Yiddish Civilization lecture on Thursday. So please join us again. Check out the full listing online. And thank you all so much. And we can leave the room open for a moment, but that's where we'll cut the recording. Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Lina, beautiful examples. You gave us the experience of it. You know, I read the article, I read the book, but you really gave the experience of almost being there with those examples, and allowed us to imagine what it was like to be at those events and those kibbutz moments.
Yeah.
Very, very useful.
I realize that a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation could be made to a company, but it always works before, and then it falls down when you start. And also, I don't know, I feel it distracts.
Well, you're a great speaker without it, so thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you spoke for it, and the material spoke for itself, the content. So
yeah, that's it. That's it.
right.
That's true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tell me, did I don't remember Sutzkever writing anything about Kovner after Kovner's death. Do you remember anything? Because Sutzkever would very frequently write or publish his correspondence with after the death of a major cultural figure. And I don't remember Sutzkever making any public printed pronouncements about Kovner.
Well, I'll check it. I don't remember either. No, I think he did. I think he did. He was so devastated when Kovner passed away. I'll check it, and if I find, I'll write to you.
All right, great. Yeah, I mean, it would be in WWII, but maybe I'm not.
Could be. Yeah.
Remembering, but also what Sutzkever would sometimes do, it was he would wait, a half a decade, so that he could do a kind of a Yortzeit, a round Yortzeit number, and then he would publish those things, and by then possibly he was not editing and publishing the WWII any longer.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I don't really know him.
Anyway, Dina, thank you again.
I remember that there is something over there.
Yeah.
But okay. Okay.
Thank you tremendously.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye-bye.
Kol tuv.